Okay, the first thing I'm doing in the assembly, I went through my inner tubes here and I sanded them with sandpaper to make sure that's nice and smooth so there's no edges or anything in it. I've went ahead and lubed the outside of my bushings. I don't know that you'd need to, but I know these can squeak under pressure. I know most of the suspension works on the inside of it as far as a bushing, but I just went ahead and lubed it anyway. Like I say, these can definitely squeak sometimes, and most of the lube comes out anyway when you push it in, so that's where I'm starting. Okay, this suspension is 6 inches over, so it's 6 inches wider, and it doesn't use a torsion bar since it has coilovers. So you have what's called through rods, which is that bolt. You can see that bolt there, but this is the through rod that goes all the way through it. It's probably over 4 feet. So it has to go into that hole, come over here, and it has to come out of that hole, which is kind of tricky sometimes, but you just have to manipulate it. Once you get it close to the end, you can kind of reach in there and with a screwdriver or something and lift up on it or move it and then kind of push it, and then you eventually get it. But so that's what I'm doing now. Okay, working on getting this through rod through. You can see if you look closely, the bolt there needs to lift up. It's on the bottom. So in order to do that, you just stick a screwdriver in it, lift up on it. But it was moving on me, so what I had to do, because this is probably be a lot easier if you had 2 people, I've had to tape my rod there from slipping through. So now I'm going to see if I can't get it lined up and push through. Okay, now I got it peeking through. It's just there's the start of the threads. Now I can go over the other side. I can hold this side and hit it with a rubber hammer on the other side and drive it through. Okay, one thing I learned doing all my research on this at some point, I don't remember where, on these through rods, a lot of people run bushings right here. They don't come with it, but it's a nylon bushing that goes between your locking nut. And I assume the reason for that is when this front end moves, it moves and it gives it a place for it to pivot, sort of like an outer bushing, so it's not grabbing directly on that and working these loose, you know, with metal to metal. You can see there it's slipping on that, so I assume that's what it's for. So it's just like a trick tip that I picked up. So I don't know if it's necessary, but I'm doing it because it seems logical and not going to hurt anything. So that's what I'm doing. Once you get your through bolts through, the next thing you have to do, I tighten down the lock nut here. But these spin, so you have to take 2 wrenches on each side at the same time and work these in evenly, because if you just try one side, it'll spin. So luckily I can reach both sides at the same time, and I have 2 wrenches with 19mm bolts on them, or sockets on them, and that's how I tighten these up. Your goal also, and when you get them tightened, is also you hope to have about the same amount of threads on each side, so it's in there evenly. It's not super important, but it's nice if you can get it that way. So I've got those about a 1/4 inch there and about a 1/4 inch on this side, so it's in there nice and straight. Okay, when I pre-assembled this bug 8-9 months ago, these front spindles, they have thrust washers that go in here. There's a new one that I have. This one I overground. You have to ground them down to fit, and I overground it so this is loose in there, so it moves too much. So I got to get it all apart and grind this new one down, hopefully get it to fit. These are tools I used last time. You can see I basically sacrificed these 3 tools. I've mushroomed the cap at the end of it. You can see it's pretty bad shape. Same way with the socket. You can kind of see, but that's how much force it takes to work these pins in and out. So hopefully I can get this taken care of today. When you're working on that, I kept this boot to cover my threads, so I still have that from last time I did it. But basically I'm just going to tear this apart and see if I can't get this fixed, and hopefully it goes smoother than the last time I was working on it. Okay, before I tore this apart, I measured the play that I had in, and I had 14 thousandths. So in theory, if I put my filler gauge on there and I get this on the caliper, that should be the proper width that I need. So it seems like it goes on that washer just fine. That's a stock one, so that should be right. That means this one shouldn't need to be ground if I did this right. Like I say, 15 thousandths was what it was. So in theory, hopefully I can just stick this in and I'll be done. So Cross my fingers and hope it works out. Okay, I ended up having to grind the thrust bearing down a little bit. I used a file, basically, filed it down. It had to come down a little bit, but it's good now. So I got it on. So both sides are on and have good tolerances. So next I've got to get some more bolts for here to lock those down. And I think I need bolts for this. So, but anyway, both spindles are on. So tomorrow I also need bolts for here to get my brakes on. So tomorrow I'll finish the front suspension. Okay, when you're assembling things, it's good to pay attention to things. These bolts that hold the caliper brackets on, they're flush right here on the back. But on the front, if you run a 3/4 inch bolt, it'll come through the back side and it'll actually hit this arm. So it would keep you from turning your full amount. So you would get a few degrees less turn. So just make sure. I'm having to cut. They didn't have 1/2 inch bolts. If I would have got 1/2 inch bolts, I probably would have been fine, but they didn't have them. So I'm running 3/4 inch bolts. I'm cutting 2 threads off the end of them, and it makes it fit in flush. So just pay attention to things like that. Otherwise, you know, you get this together, and if those bolts were too long, you wouldn't have full turning radius, and you might not even know why. Okay, quick tip: if you're working on a kingpin front end, you got a bushing that goes in there for the kingpin. Normally these are open, so it's a good place for water to capture. I'm filling it with anti-seize in there, get it full. And I bought these furniture caps from Lowe's. I've had to put cut little notches in them to go around the curve of it, but that's what it is. And then that will just pop in and cover that up. Okay, I got everything on my suspension hung. I got my cap in there to keep dirt and mud out. I got my hubs on there tightened. They're ready to go. Next thing I got to do is drop in the brake caliper. If you remember, I'm running these Heims. Normally they run on the top, but to give me more travel up and down, I'm running them on the bottom. Before I had clearance for the brake caliper, barely, but I just need to check and see. I have a Heim spacer in the bottom that I cut down. I don't know if we can see it, but it's just barely there. Anyway, so now I've got to check for that and see if I have to make some clearance. Okay, what I've decided to do, you can see these were both of these misalignment Heims were the same, and I've cut this one down. You can see this side, it looked like this one before, but I cut it down to give as much room. Instead of grinding the bolt or anything, I just need a little bit of clearance to clear the caliper. So I'm going to cut this one down where there's kind of like 2 ridges. I'm going to cut it down to the second ridge because I really don't need that much misalignment anyway. So that'll make it work. And this is a 5/8 Heim, and I'm running a 1/2 inch joint or 1/2 inch bolt. That's why I'm having to run these. So basically they're just washers or spacers inside there anyway. The way I cut these, I clamp them between 2 pieces of steel and gives me a flat bottom on it. So when I run it through, it keeps it parallel, keeps it from twisting. That way I can cut a straight line. So I'll just run this through and trim off one side. When you get through to the end, because there's a little pressure on there, it'll start to pinch the blade a little bit. So keep the vice grips a little loose, but tight enough to keep it firm. But that should allow you to run it through and get a nice straight cut. Okay, here's what I ended up with. Because I barely have any on the bottom on this one to clear the caliper, but I got about a little less than 1/8 of an inch on the top, so that'll be fine. I think I'll have bolt clearance now and everything will work just fine. Okay, with that ground down, it gives me plenty of clearance. I have probably 1/8 of an inch there. These parts don't go up and down or move. I mean, at the worst, this bolt will twist, so it twists. The only downside is to get this bolt out is I have to take the caliper off to get it off. But the positive of that, if the bolt backs off, it'll hit the caliper and not fall out, so it kind of works as a safety. Okay, this morning I'm prepping my shocks. I'm getting ready to take them to have nitrogen put in them. Locally, there's only a couple of places that can do that here. I'm going to try the first place and see what they charge. I really don't know what they charge. I can always get my own bottle and do it myself, but for doing this, I'm going to try to see if they do it for, hopefully they do it for pretty cheap. If not, I'll need it for future anyway, so I can just get a bottle for $53. So I'll need fittings to make it work, but still. What I'm doing now, my misalignment washers fall out, so I'm just zip tying all those in so they don't get anywhere, and zip tying the reservoirs so they don't flop around so much. So anyway, I'll get these to the shop and get them filled hopefully, and if not, I'll get my own tank and do it myself. Okay, I went about as far as I can go with the front suspension. I got everything on there. I got most everything tightened. And on there, I got the shocks on. Did that this morning. Got these filled with nitrogen. The only thing I have to do, to get this on, I have to let it down so the weight will come up on that. So that's gonna be there for a while, but I gotta add the brake lines, stuff like that before I do all that. So, with that being said, the front suspension is basically done for now. I'm going to move on to the rear suspension. On these, I decided to run the bolts on the outside, which is kind of, in a way, a problem. But I'm going to cut them off and put little button heads on them so they're smooth. But when I access the reservoirs here, I didn't want the bolts sticking out, for one, so that helps me on the inside. But on the battery box side, if I had them on the inside, it would have kept me from taking the lid off, so I had to run them on the outside.
I think I've cut off just about almost every one of the power.
Okay, yesterday Ed went through the wiring harness, and even though these are labeled like every 6 inches, it's kind of hard to read, especially when you get our age. So he went through, and you can see he put labels on them just to make it easier to see. So he organized what goes to the front and what goes to the back, but now there's paper labels on there. They're a little easier to see. This makes it a little easier when you go to lay it out if you can see it quickly instead of having to look at the wire every time. Okay, I got these zip ties in for the winch wires on that side, and on the other side we've installed a kill switch on the side of it. So that'll be where that's at. And I'll show you where this fits in the buggy. Okay, we're just mocking everything up right now, so I'm not making it permanent, but that's the zip tie holders I put on the front of the battery. That's, you can see the grommets there. That's where the winch wires will go through when we're done. And on the other side, here's where I put my battery kill switch. Kind of on the inside, but it's easy to access. So that's kind of the best spot for it. So that's ready. So now I've got the electrical mocked up for Ed when he'll get here later. I'm going to start hanging the rear suspension now. Okay, I got the rear suspension arms mocked in. They're in. Everything's still a little bit loose, but I want to take some measurements to see the distance from spindle to spindle on each side to make sure my wheels are equally spaced. Then I have a little bit of caster you can adjust on these, not much, but I need to check that. So I've lined up the front end. I use a tool that I made, so I've got the front end adjusted now so it's square. It's got like an 1/8 inch toe in. So that's ready to go. And what I'll do, since these are in the fixed location, I'll spin this around so this is the farthest forward, and I'll put a wire on there and I'll measure from here to the back spindle, and that should be the same on each side. It should get me close enough within the ballpark. So that's the next step. All right, now I move back to the rear. I'm going to check the rear the same way to see if it's square, if it needs toe in or toe out, if it's even. I have the same amount of threads on each heim joint, and so I don't know if that'll make it right or not, so I may have to adjust that. That's why I left everything loose so I can adjust this. That'll pull this forward, should pull it in a little bit if it needs to be. So we'll put the tape measures on it and check it. Okay, it's way off, so I'm going to have to tighten these in quite a bit. I've got, what, 61 3/4 one side and 59 3/4 on the other. So one problem I'm going to have, I can see right off, I probably should have did this better during mock-up, because that's going to throw this off the bump stop. That's going to move. It may still land on it, but it's not going to be centered on it. So I'll just have to deal with that. If I have to change that, I may have to do something with that, but we'll see. But it's important to get this lined up. Obviously, I can't have it the way it is, so I'm going to work now at bringing these in, which should pull this forward, which should square things up, hopefully. Okay, I brought both sides in all the way. I just left a little bit of a new one thread. on both sides, which pulled this out. Now I have 61 and just under 7/8 and 61 and 7/8. So that's why I have just a little bit in. Basically, it's the same. So anyway, that took care of it. Looks like this is still kind of lined up, but it's not lined up as good as it was. So in hindsight, I probably should have done this during mock-up. It looked close, but obviously it wasn't. So that's, had to do over again, I would do this first. Like I said, I knew I had to do it when it was all done to line everything up, but I thought it would be a little closer than what it was. So anyway, it's not that big a deal. It's still going to hit this pad, but I'll check it and see. I might have to make it bigger, or I could have made this oversized. But that's a minor issue, really. So anyway, I'm going to button it up, tighten things up, and I still need to check front and rear to make sure these are the same on each side, which hopefully they are. So we'll do that next and see where we're at before we can tighten it all up. Okay, this is the same method I used when I was working on the Baja. I've got a rope there with a little hook on it, and I've got that on the spindle. So basically, pull it until I get the wheel all the way straight, and then I put a mark on the tape, and I pull on it about as hard as I can. Right there's a mark. Right there on the stud, you can see the blue line. So that's with all the pressure I can pull on it. A wire would be better, it wouldn't stretch as much, but if I pull the same on each side, it's about as hard as I can pull, and it's right on the mark there. So now we go to the other side and we do the same thing. Okay, on the passenger side of my camera, I'm on the passenger side, I'm 90.4, so I'm pretty much close enough. On this side, I'm like 91.2. On these arms, if I twist up on this way, before you clamp that, you have to kind of pull up on it, you kind of twist it down. That causes this to lean in a little bit. That's kind of how you adjust it. So I've just got to find a way to pull this up and twist it, clamp my bolts in, and that'll hold it. So it's pretty close. I could probably run it as it is. It's pretty close, but like I say, to adjust the camber on these, you just twist this torsion arm. Normally these are slotted more. You have more room to do that. These are just drilled out for the holes, so I don't know how much. I was just doing it by hand, and I could almost move it. So I think there's enough room in it to get it. So anyway, I'm going to work on getting this in a position where I can have it where I need it to be and then tighten it. So, but the rear end looks good. Everything's in tolerances now. So once I get that squared away, I guess we'll move on to the coilovers. Okay, I put a strap on it to help hold it. I'm going to twist it as much as I could. I have, from side to side, I have a half a degree difference, which is fine. So basically, it's close enough. So I'm not going to worry about a half a degree. Now that I got these tightened, once you get it set, you can go ahead and drill your other holes. That way you'll have 5 bolts in it. But you want to get that set at the right angle before you do that. So next I'll drill those holes and finish that up. Go ahead and tighten everything up here. And tighten up my pivot bolt back there all the way, and we'll be ready to put the coilovers on. Okay, now I'm going through and removing these bolts one by one and putting blue Loctite on them, and then I'll torque them all down. So they were mocked up, and now it's ready to tighten down. I'll just make sure I got Loctite on them. Okay, before I put the rear coilovers, I'm going to go over the bolts. These bolts I had to get from Granger, and they were specific on things like the shocks, things that go when bolts go through things. You want everything to ride on the sleeve, not the threads. So it's more important to order them based on the sleeve length. That way the threads aren't inside there. If the threads are inside there, they'll kind of work as a foul. As it moves, it'll just kind of grind away on it. So it's important to get oversized bolts and then cut them down to fit. But that way the full sleeve is inside there. This makes it stronger, makes it last longer, and it keeps them grinding up the parts. So again, I just had to order longer bolts, and I've got to cut about a ½ inch off of this one. Got to do that for 2. And this one also has to be cut down to fit in there because I have a limited space where it fits in because of the rotor. So anyway, this is one of the things you want to make sure you do to do it properly. Okay, before I try to put the shock in place, I went through and I reamed out all my holes. Put a little bit of oil in there. I went through that with the ½ inch. So that's clean. I did the same thing on the bottom holes. And I test the bolts so they go in nice and easy. So now we can set the shock in place. Okay, I just spent the last half an hour working on the top mount, getting these mounted in there. When I made these, I thought I would leave them a little loose so they would compress. But what happened is they don't compress at all. I guess it's so solid, they don't compress, so my shock was loose side to side. So I had to work a washer in between the HOM joint things, and you can see one washer sticking out there. And you can see the other one back there, kind of in the corner. There it is. You can kind of see it. That was a huge pain in the ass because I had to walk the washers up inside there and roll them across and get them both lined up at the same time to get that in. I didn't think I was going to be able to do it, honestly, but it took about a half an hour. So that was a pain. These are the kind of things that take, you don't think about when you're putting stuff together. It's like, oh, you just bolt it together, but I probably spent a total of 45 minutes on these two bolts. I got the bottom ones in. They worked out good. They had spacers in them too, but they were obviously easy to put in, so we're almost getting there. Okay, now I'm drilling my extra holes in my swing plates here. I got this torqued down, everything's set, everything's aligned, so I'm going to go ahead and drill these holes out. I've got the other side finished. I'm step drilling them, but I'll get the bolts on those, and then that'll finish up the rear suspension. All right, here's our wiring loom. Preliminary has been marked out. I got everything mounted to the fuse box, or the box. Inside the box, this grid goes into the box. So I got all those mounted down. Here's the box, waterproof box. And I'm gonna drill a hole in the side of it. And then we gotta take all these wires and get them through the hole that I get cut in there. So that's what's next. This is Ed, he's learning everything about the wiring diagram. And he's gonna be doing 80% of the wiring, I think. All right, there's wire number 1 through the hole. We only got about 400 more to go. Woohoo! Or each wire Ed pulls through, he's going to mark each wire as it comes through. That way he knows where it goes. Like that, that's the dome light. So that's wire number 1. So each turn signals, brake lights, all the lights, as they get pulled through, he's going to mark them, make it easier to route them and know where they need to go. Okay, after I had my transmission rebuilt, I put a new nose cone on it because it was cracked on the bolts. This nose cone has larger bolts, so I'm having to drill out my mount. So that's what I'm working on now. Okay, this is going to be the 4th time I try to put the transmission in. On these bolts, the previous one had studs like this, so I was having trouble getting the bolt in. There wasn't enough room lined up, so I ended up putting a stud in here. And I can still get the bolt there. But anyway, I tried and tried, and this is going to be the solution, hopefully. So hopefully I'll be able to get this in here now. Okay, the transmission's out again. Now I'm going to have to put some clearance. I've got to cut this so the bolt will go on. It's not clearing. This is a different nose cone on this transmission, so that's probably the problem. I had it mocked up. And the bolts were much smaller on the original nose cone. So anyway, that's just part of the problem. So I'm going to have to cut that down and grind that, and hopefully the 5th time will be the charm. Okay, I got that ground down. I rounded the corners so I don't cut myself. I can put a little bit of paint on that, and hopefully the net will fit in there now, and we'll be done with this. It'll be the 6th time we put the transmission in. Well, it's out again. So my problem now is I need to ream 1 or 2 of these holes out a little bit more. The bolts just quite won't go together, so this will be the 7th time I'm working on it. Okay, after 7 attempts, I got the transmission set in place. So I got the strap on it, which is also a pain in the ass. I put a foam rubber seal on it. You can kind of see there. So that made it a little bit tighter, but I eventually got it. So I don't have it torqued down yet, but anyway, it's finally in there. These are on this side, at least it's in the way, so I'm gonna have to bend this emergency brake cable, so I'm gonna have to play with that. And these wires will be a pain in the ass to get onto. It's real close there. So anyway, it's in. Hard days. These are the days when people ask you get frustrated when people ask you, is it done yet? When are you going to finish it? But I literally spent the whole day at 7 o'clock. I came out here about 10:30 and I worked on the wiring box a little bit, not much. But basically I spent the whole day setting the transmission in place to 2 bolts, really. 4 if you count the strap. So, and that took all day. So it's just crazy. I would have never believed that when I started my day. But that's part of building things, and even though I mocked it up, you still run into problems. So it was a frustrating day, but I'll keep going. I got the rest of the week and the weekend, so I'll just keep pushing and we'll get more done. Okay, now I'm working on the shifter linkage. I had to pull the shifter back out. When I installed it, one flaw, I think, of this design anyway, one I have, maybe it's because it's old. When you torque these bolts down, because it's hollow, there's nothing to stop the bolts inside. If you over tighten it, it flexes in and it kind of distorts that. So by the time you get it tight, then it binds the shifter up. So what I'm doing is on the rods that go through there, I'm making a spacer that goes in there, so then it hits the bottom, so when it tightens down, it won't be able to deflect. And that should solve the problem. So I'm doing that with aluminum spacers. I'm just cutting them out of a piece of aluminum I had. I got the shifter in. I'm gonna have to pull it back off and trim. It goes into first and third gear, but it kind of touches right here. And the transmission guy told me. So I'm just gonna trim a little bit of this off so I have a little bit more space. Seems like it goes in gear, but it's touching, so I just want to make sure that it's not binding in any way. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull it off. All right, I got the U-joint cut down. Now it's in third gear, and I've got about 1/8 of an inch there, so it's good. I guess I can tighten everything up, and hopefully the shifter is done. Okay, back on the wiring harness, we have the wires separated. These are the ones that are going to run to the back of it. And there's the box with the fuse block in it, and the relays. These are the ones that run to the front. We're gonna pause. This wiring harness I had, it's a Speedway's Motors wiring harness, and it has more circuits than I needed, which was fine. We were just gonna use what we need and clip off the other ones and put them back in the box, the wires in the box, so if I ever need to update. But the wiring diagram that comes with this is basically not a wiring diagram, so I had to call Speedway Motors. They're going to mail me some stuff to help sort this one, and we're also looking at their new wiring harness to get up some ideals, because some of the things on this are a little confusing, and Ed wants to make sure he gets them right, but it's kind of confusing. So anyway, we're going to pause a little bit on this until we get the wiring diagram and get it sorted out. These wires are labeled every 6 inches, but for instance, for the turn signals on the front, there's 4 wires. There's 4 wires for the turn signals, well, you don't need 4 wires, not including the ground, so it's kind of weird. And there's 2 wires for high beam. These are both high beam wires. One's like a 12 gauge and one's 14 gauge, so even that's weird. So anyway, we're gonna sort all that out. So okay, now I'm starting to hook up the emergency brakes. I've got the cable right there hooked up there and run through. It goes through there, it goes around to my mounts. I had to bend those mounts. Those mounts I put in before the transmission, or I did it when it wasn't locked up, but they bent into shape. So now I've got to cut them, fit in that. These are universal, they're way too long, but cut them and just get that down there. But I want to make sure I leave enough slack in this line that when I pull the brakes off, I have enough room for it to slide so I can get the brakes on and off. So, okay, one thing I've decided to do, I bought so many bolts, you usually have to buy more than you need. So I'm putting together these spare bolt packages. This is one each of the shock bolts. There's a swing plate. I'm gonna add some bolts of that, shift rods. These are all bolts that I have extra. I'm putting them together and I'll carry these in the car with me. I'll get them all grouped together and put them in one spot. That way if I break down or something, I'll have a bolt for almost every common place. That might make a difference between getting home and not getting home. So, okay, one thing you have to do when you run a bus to bug mount is your engine studs have to be longer. So these are the old ones I took out, and I was dreading this because I didn't know if these would be seized up inside here or not, but they actually came out really easy, so I was lucky. But there's the part number, bug pack, and you can see how much longer they are. Make sure you put anti-seize on these, because if you ever have to take them out, you don't want them to seize up. And like I say, I feel like I got lucky with these, that they went right in. So, but I feel like I've got a problem now. Oh, there it goes. Felt like the bolt was too big, but it's gone. So anyway, I'll get those in and that'll solve that. I'm trying to get the motor prep to go in. Next, I got to button up the wire ties here to keep the wires off the exhaust. So I'll do that next. Okay, the new studs are in. They went in pretty smoothly. So I was worried about that because this engine's 1971 and probably had the original studs, so I was worried about them coming out, but they actually came out and went back in pretty smooth. So, and like I say, next I'm going to work on the wire, get this buttoned up, and then I've got to find my clutch tool, my alignment tool, and then put the clutch on. I'm trying to get this ready to go in either today or tomorrow. Okay, to keep my wires from dangling into the exhaust, I use these little clips that I got, the little zip tie clips that pop rivet in, or you can screw them in. But I pop riveted one in to the side of the fan shroud there, and I used a 3-hole wire loom. And because I had a 3-hole, the head of the zip tie, I was able to tuck it inside the hole so you can't really even see it, so it looks nice and neat. That'll work to keep my wires away from the exhaust. I put heat shields on them too, just in case, but I don't know if it's necessary, but it might help in case they get close and get burned, if that would break or something. But now I need to add one on the other side. It's not as bad, but I'll add one to the other side. I've got the studs in the engine. It's probably ready to take over to the buggy now. I have to make an extension for my carburetor here for the carburetor. It hits in a couple places, so I'm just going to have to make a little 1-inch riser for that. But I may add it and take it up high, I don't know. Okay, today's goal was to get the engine installed, but I ran into a slight setback. Everything's fine with the motor here, but when I went to start getting my pieces together, I pulled everything out. Pressure plate, new clutch, throwout bearing. Well, the problem I ran into, this engine came out of this Karmann Ghia, and it's a 1971. So I had bought a lot of these parts when I was working on this so the parts have been here for a while. This being a 71 has a different throwout bearing. Up to 70, they used a throwout bearing, and then 71 they switched to this throwout bearing. That's a problem with this transmission because it's the early style. It's a little hard to see. So anyway, I can't put it together because I don't have a throwout bearing. I can't use this one. So I had to order a new throwout bearing. So that actually will be here tomorrow. So it's not too bad. But what I'm going to have to do is shift focus onto the brakes. So I'll spend the day working on my brake lines. I'll have to pull some of this wiring up out of the way, but I'm going to go ahead and start working the brake lines because that's a big thing that needs to be done. So it's not that big of a deal. It's just shift and focus. Okay, the first thing I did to start my brakes is clean up a workstation. I've done a lot of brakes in the past, and I've used these kits here. In my opinion, these are junk. Don't even waste your time buying them. These might be good if you have like one brake line that you have to repair, but you always run into problems with these. These things twist in here, and your flare gets bent. It's not like square. So in my opinion, these are just for emergency purposes only. So I would recommend not buying one of those and invest in one like this. I'll admit this is new to me, but I've watched enough videos and seen enough people use them, and now I have used it once. This is the way to go. These are about $200, but it's 100% worth it. I'll show you what I did. My tools. This is the cutoff wheel to cut the tubing. I'm using the nickel copper tubing. It's a cheap way of having stainless things won't rust. I made the first one, and you can see it's perfectly smooth. Fits on there real nice. So it's perfect. So I just recut it. Show you the other side. If you look closely, you can see when you cut it off, it leaves it kind of ragged inside there. So you take the reamer, so when you go in there and you clean that up, and then that'll give you a smooth opening. So let me set the camera up and I'll walk through the steps of doing a double flare. Okay, when you do this is a two-step process. So what I did on mine to make it a little easier. This does various sizes of tubing. So the ones I need 3/16, so there's 2 steps. So just to make it easier for me to see when I rotate it. That's step 1 and that's step 2. So step 1, and then I rotate to step 2. And this has like a clear film on it that's supposed to peel off, so I just wrote on top of that, so I can peel it off later if I don't want it on there, but that just makes it easier for me to see step 1, step 2 at a glance. So anyway, let's go through the steps. Okay, for this purpose, you do want to remember to put your ends on before you clamp. When you do have both ends, you have to have both ends on there because they have to be on there. But for this, we don't need it, so I'm going to take it off. First thing you want to do is take your reamer and you just want to ream this hole out. So I can get it in. I'm going upside down so gravity works with me. That way the pieces that are in there will fall down, but then you just get it nice and clean. Alright, first step, you got these different blocks, and like I say, these blocks are for different fittings. This is a 3/16 side with the flare. So you can get your piece in there, and you want it flush with the end of the block. And it has little guides, so you can't get it backwards and anything. So you get that in there. Push it all the way back against the back wall. This is your pin that goes in. Then you tighten it pretty tight because you're putting a lot of force on it. Step 1, you get this lined up. When you get it, you can fill it. You just pull on it. It doesn't go all the way in, it leaves about 1/8 of an inch of gap, but you fill it, get tight. Then you rotate it to number 2, your second step, which puts the inverted flare into it. That lined up, you can fill it, pull it, and it's tight, and we should have a good flare at this point. Yep, nice as the first one. So it couldn't be easier. Like I say, it's worth the money to buy one of these, and like I say, the other ones, I've used those before and they just cause you nothing but headaches. So now we just got to start measuring and bending tubing and start flaring things, and we'll move along. Okay, the first I'm going to start with the front brake line. So the first thing I did is install my T fitting. This is a lot easier before I put the electrical box in, so I guess I'm one of those engineers now that mechanics bitch about. So it was a little harder to get this in than I thought it was going to be, obviously, because of the clearance of the box and the Allen wrench. But anyway, things just have to fit where they have to fit, so you have to work around it. And so I think I'll start with maybe this side first, since it's easier, get the hang of it, and then I've got to go under the box and under the battery thing. I have to do most of that from underneath because all this stuff's in the way now. But let's start it and see what happens. Okay, I'm using this thin aluminum wire here to pre-bend my brake lines, or just give me a pattern. So I've bent that about where I want it, so I ended up with the shape here. So now I'll just take it to the vents, and I'll transfer these shapes into the brake line. That'll give me a guide. It'll get me pretty close to where I need to be. So let's start transferring this to that. Okay, for these gentle bends here, you can do those by hand. This stuff's soft enough. For the hard 90s, I'm using the bender. So anyway, it's coming out nice so far. Hopefully it fits. I'm trying to gauge where to start the bend. I think it's about 5/8 to 3/4 of an inch from the line is where to come up. So I'll just have to work through that and figure out where that is. And hopefully I get them close enough. And I'm looking like I'm probably gonna have to order new brake line. By looking at this, it's hard to tell. I think this is 25 feet, so I don't know. We'll see how it goes. Okay, at least on the bench, it's a pretty good match. So I'll do this loop, this top loop. I'll do it on the car. Okay, I didn't get it perfect, but it's gonna be close enough. I don't want to waste tube. It looks pretty good. These bends came up short, so I had to undo them a little bit, so they're not quite as smooth as I was like, but I can still work them on the bench a little bit. But it's going to be close enough because I don't want to waste tubing. Okay, I'm happy enough with this. I got one line bent, ready to go. That goes in, makes all the turns. And I got it connected in there. Probably I could have put a 90 right here too, but that's just an extra fitting, but that's going to work. But a 90 could be used here too, but I can live with that. Okay, brake line number 2. There's a few different bends in it because it has to go around the battery box, but looks like this one's good too. Haven't done this for a little while now, this morning. The best thing I ever did is mark these, step 1, step 2, because it's easy to forget where you were. You just get in a hurry doing it. But that's a quick reminder, so that's definitely a good tip, at least for me. It keeps me. Alright, now I got my front brake little jump line in. So now I'm going to start on the rear brake. I get my rear brake line ran to the left wheel, the driver's side. I'm putting my little clips in that hold the brake lines. That'll be for the right, left, and the clutch. And that's what those 3 holes are for. And these are just the little clips I got off of Amazon. They hold it. And I had to cut the flange on them so where they overlap. I cut both sides of that and half of that one. That way they line up. Looks like one piece. Okay, all the brake lines are made. There's the one in the rear. Same thing over here. And that's and I've got to work this one a little bit more. It goes to the front, and I got all the ones on the front. So all the brake lines are done. I did run out of brake lines for the clutch, so I have to order some more to run the clutch. But that basically took all day. I started about 11 a.m. and it's now 7 p.m. So, and I didn't stop for lunch or anything, so pretty much took all day to do it, but we got it done. Okay, today I'm basically waiting for parts to show up. I did make a little bracket for my clutch to come through for the flex line. Will be on this side and the hard line on that side. I just cut a piece of aluminum and twisted it so it could bolt to the transmission. I'm waiting for the new throwout bearing, but while I'm doing that, one thing that I'm struggling with, and pressure plate, this is for the late 71 and older, but it comes with the early bearing that you have to put in it, which that goes through there like that, and that goes through the other side. I'll show you. But then it has this ring which is loose. If you do it that way, it's loose. I'll show you sideways because it's kind of bent. It's up. What I'm assuming is if you put it in there, the only way I can see that it works, if you put it in there and you drive it down, as this goes down, those will get closer, they'll shrink in as they go down, because on the little collar, I mean, it's loose, it's real loose. So what I've decided I think you have to do, stick that on there where it goes, and then I found what size is this? A 1 1/16 socket that fits inside of that to hold the bearing. And these go on. You got to make sure you line up your teeth. There's little grooves in there. There's 2 teeth per spot. So I'll get it in there and get it centered the best I can. I assume this goes flexed up in there around that ring, and it's loose, so it's not holding anything. But I think if you take a bigger socket which fits over that ring, which is 1 1/4, I think if you put that on and drive that down, that'll force those in and make it smaller and tighter, and it'll grab onto that. That's the only thing I know to do. I don't know if that's the right way to do it. I'm trying to figure this out and learn, but that's the only way I can see that it works, and I couldn't find anything on the internet about it, so I'm gonna give it a shot and see what happens. Okay, well, that didn't work. The only thing it did was flip the ring. It just inverted it. I mean, so now it's beveled the other way. So I just flipped it from that to that, so I'm not sure what to do. I'm gonna have to keep doing some research and try to figure this out. Maybe it's just the wrong size, or I just haven't figured it out yet. Okay, what I decided to do after I got online and found some pictures, they seem to always have a flange around them from stock. The only way I could do that is I'm taking a ratchet and I'm going around. I still have that 1 1/8 socket on the other side, and I'm just taking this and I'm going around real evenly and hitting it with a big hammer, and it's forming a nice lip actually. And then I'll take, once I get it down pretty even, I'll find the right size socket and I'll set on it once I get it flat and try to drive it down. It's either that or buy a new one. I don't want to spend $80 on a new one and have to wait 4 or 5 days. So I got to the point where I decided if I trash this, that's fine. I'll get a new one because the pressure plate will still be good. This is the bearing sleeve part, but it looks like this is working. So I'll keep driving it down and keep working it around and see if that works. Okay, after I had it hammered down with this as far as I could get it, I went back to another 1 and I think it's 1 1/8, and I just kind of worked it around. I tried to drive the whole thing straight down, but I had to kind of angle it on it and just keep working the corner around, kind of just angle it slowly, go around it, but it finally set down on there, and it's on there good. It's just got a little bit of movement and it's lined up, so I guess that'll work. Okay, I think that's where I'm going to stop this video. Basically it's Sunday and I'm waiting for parts, and it's already almost 5 o'clock, so parts probably aren't going to be here till 6 or 7, so I probably filmed a lot already, so I'm going to go ahead and put this one together. So this will be part 3, and then there'll be one more part, I guess. So I'm getting close. Like I say, I've got a week before Labor Day, and there's a show I'm trying to get ready for. It'll be close whether I hit that or not, so I don't know. We'll see. But there's 3 or 4 more shows after that. So either way, I'll get it done. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.